Thank you for the invitation. I'm really excited to be here with you this morning. There's a lot to talk about. I think leadership in a shifting context should be something that all of us are extremely worried about. About a week and a half, 2 weeks ago, I was at the World Economic Forum down in Durban. And the primary theme that came out very strongly was this concept of inclusion. I was also down there assisting in launching a digital IQ survey by PwC. And this essentially is a document that's helping us to understand where exactly we fit on the scale of technology, innovation, and adoption in comparison to our counterparts globally and our counterparts across the continent. Now, we all know where this journey started, and it was when Nigeria overtook South Africa as the biggest economy in Africa, which was a bit of a bump to the ego. Not so long ago, as mentioned before, we've now been reduced to junk status. One of the key findings that came out of the report released by PwC was that now CEOs and CIOs in South Africa are falling behind from a technology and innovation perspective compared to their peers across the continent and the peers across the world. So I think it's an opportune conversation to have a discussion around leadership, specifically in the context of technology. And that's what I'm passionate about, and that's what I'm going to speak to you about today. I'm going to take a very high-level view of what I believe to be the changes that have happened in a macro perspective and what links back to the consumer. Then I'm going to speak a little bit about what it all boils down to, which is the human element. Then I'll give a few observations on what I think is important considerations around what leadership at the speed of light looks like and what we should be encouraging in young people coming into organizations and young people coming out of institutions like this. 594,694. 500,000 people were registered as dying on the birth and deaths registry in South Africa last year. Of these 500,000 people, one of them was particularly important to me. I lost a relative. His name was Twasante Yona Seleti. He passed away at the age of 22 from sickle cell anemia. Now, those of you that know sickle cell anemia, it's a deformity in the red blood cells. It's a tough disease. He fought a valiant battle, but at the age of 22, lost the battle. And an interesting story about Twasante is he threw himself a bash before he left this planet. In a small, quiet suburb in Pretoria, where my uncle and my aunt live, he decided he was going to throw himself a party, as a 21-year-old does. Now, Twasante invited all of his friends. They came from far and wide. Streets were lined up with cars. The following day, his father found him strewn on the couch, passed out, and, as young people do, he was very drunk. His father went up to him and he said, "Twasi, why would you do this to yourself? Why do you continue to do this? You know you've got sickle cell anemia. You cannot be drinking like this. You cannot be spending your life lying on a couch drunk." And you know what Twasi's response was? He said, "Dad, you know that I'm going to die. So I'd rather spend the time I have living alive." It's an important notion because I think all of us are going to come to a point in our lives where we're going to be on our deathbeds. And it's captured very well by a Greek tragedian called Sophocles. And he speaks about this concept that every man is going to get to the end of their lives and they're going to look back and they're going to have a moment of reflection. That moment of reflection is going to be, did I live a life that was free of pain? Or did I live a life full of pain due to the fact that I tried to make changes and I tried to ensure that the world is in a better place than I found it? This notion is an important thing to understand because all around us, every day, all day, the media is full of different reports that speak about the state of humanity and the state of things that are happening currently. These three boys in a small suburb in Nairobi wake up every single morning and they do the same thing. They wake up, they get dressed, they brush their teeth, they eat some food, and they trot off to school. On this particular morning, they got up and they repeated their process. And as they trotted off to school, fortunately, the boy in the middle's name was Anesu, and Anesu's father was there. So he waved goodbye to his father as he walked down the road. Got on a bus, went to school. Now, Anesu's father happened to be there that morning because he was a security guard. He worked shifts. So that particular morning, he got home at 6 o'clock, and he was able to wave goodbye to his son. The following morning, chaos broke out at a local mall called Westgate in Nairobi. It was fear, it was disaster, it was mayhem. Anesu's father had gone back to work and unfortunately lost his life in a gun battle with terrorists that attacked the mall. Not too far across the Atlantic, in Paris, a series of bombings started in a small suburb called Saint Denis, went on to the Bataclan Theatre and across a number of different suburbs in Paris. Suicide bombers took the lives of 130 different people on that day. And we hear these stories all the time. The interesting thing is that human suffering is actually the thing that makes us more human. And I can't help but reflect on this quote by Robertson Davies that says, extraordinary people survive under the most extraordinary circumstances and go on to be more extraordinary because of it. And this reminds me of Africa. It reminds me of our people who survive under the most frightening circumstances. And I put it to you that we go on to become more extraordinary because of it. The important thing to observe in these two interesting scenarios is not only the human tragedy, but the leadership that was shown by technology businesses, specifically in Paris. For the first time, Facebook launched what they called their safety check, which is a technology that allowed someone to press a button and inform with 3 words anybody that was one of their friends that they were okay. 3 words in a time of crisis. I am okay. Uber did something very interesting, and Uber as a business I've got a love-hate relationship with. But at that particular time, they took off their surge pricing. As you know, when traffic is congested, when people are using their platform, they have what they call surge pricing, so they charge you a premium to use their service. During this period, they took off surge pricing and essentially incentivized their drivers to try and help collecting and taking people to places of safety. Airbnb did a similar thing. They had a conference actually that was running in Paris at the time. They canceled that conference firstly. Secondly, what they did was they encouraged anyone that was a host registered on their system in and around the affected areas to take in people that were affected by the tragedy. This is leadership shown by 3 technology companies who did nothing outside of their core business, but were able to respond in a way that was more human, and in that way solve problems for human beings. Right here in Kenya, we have a similar example. Technology called Ushahidi, which essentially is a crowd map that allows you to be able to pinpoint where there are disasters happening. And this was born out of the tragedies and the violence that emerged after the elections. Ushahidi as a crowd map essentially allows municipalities, authorities, and people the ability to connect with people that need help in a time of need. And it's gone on to be used in Australia during the floods, as well as in other countries like Peru and Haiti. Technology being able to solve human problems is going to be how we're going to win and how we need to be leading in an uncertain, volatile future. We can't move away from the fact that we operate in a fundamentally commercial environment. And a part of me as a marketer has to come back to this notion of how do we continue to add value? How do we continue to create not only great brands, great experiences, but revenue for the businesses that we are serving? So it's important to think like a brand. And in the marketing space, I put it to you that marketing has changed quite a bit in the last couple of years. At some stage, you needed to develop a brief, send it off to an agency. That agency needed to put some great copy on it, give it to a designer. The designer created an amazing image, gave it to a copywriter who came up with a logo like Yebo Gogo. And then you went to the media guys who put it all over the internet as well as on the highways, and voila, you made money. That was the formula. Unfortunately, everybody started doing exactly the same thing. And what happens when everyone does the same thing? You all start making a hell of a lot of noise. And as a result, consumers not only start tuning out, but they're no longer interested in what you have to say. And we had to start doing things differently. The signals for change in the way we approach marketing and the way we approach consumers are everywhere. I'm not going to go into a lot of statistics, but I will give you some interesting numbers. If you add up the amount of time that's being spent on mobile devices, on tablets and on cell phones, and you compare it to the amount of time being spent on television, it's almost double the amount of time, 313 minutes compared to 115 minutes, which is a shift in the last 18 to 24 months. If you look at how people are interacting with mobile devices, 31% of the time, most people are in front of more than one device, which changes how you should be communicating to them, and it should change how you are showing up in their lives. Now, it's important to understand that although these numbers seem a little bit far removed from reality, all of us go through this. Think about your own interaction when you're watching the game yesterday and you're rooting for Liverpool to win, and you're on your phone on a WhatsApp group with your friends and your family, and you're in front of the screen and you're giving commentary as you're watching. Or some other people like a program called Our Perfect Wedding. This is the most famous kiss in South Africa. Why? Because as soon as it happened on Our Perfect Wedding, within milliseconds, it was on Facebook, it was on Twitter, and it was online. Because people are spending time in front of their devices and in front of television. Now, we also know that from an Africa perspective, there's an amazing energy. There's a changing nature of how Africans are adopting their own future and their own destiny. And I think this change in energy is amazing to embrace, but I think it's going to be driven fundamentally from young people who look nothing like you, sound nothing like you, and are particularly odd. This energy we're going to need to harness in order for us to be able to understand what leadership looks like. And we need to acknowledge that leadership looks nothing like what we have an understanding of. If you look at two different economic periods between 2005 and 2010 and 2011 and 2015, we went from 6 African countries to being the fastest growing in the world to now 7 African countries being the fastest growing economies in the world. Those economies have got young people in the majority. Those economies are being driven by progressive policy, and those economies are being underpinned by an adoption of technology second to none. We need to understand that the narrative starts to change in the media as soon as we start adopting a very different view of our own continent. If you look at the tone and if you look at how media has positioned Africa in the last 10 years, it was always about the poor continent. Oh, woe is me. Africa, the guys that need a hand up. The guys that we're going to go riding on horses and save. But over the last couple of years, because of this changing energy, we start to see that the narrative in mainstream media is starting to turn. We're now looking at Africa as the final frontier, the billion-person opportunity that's going to unlock millions of revenue for these big American companies, sending lots and lots of corporates and expats to be able to try and have their last innings to make hay while the sun is still out. The narrative has started to change. And as people say, the West has an agenda, the East has an agenda, and we need to be clear about defining our agenda. An African proverb speaks about this notion of lifting as you rise. And I think this is a key tenet to understanding leadership and how we should be showing up to make sure that we are able to change our economies. Because at the moment, if we don't focus squarely on solving human problems, we're going to struggle to create sustainable business in the future. And at no better time has being human been more good for enterprise as it is now. There's an interesting notion that I like to study, and it's the relationship between development and technology. Those of you that follow the Human Development Index, you'll be aware of this graph and this data. The Human Development Index essentially is a way of understanding wellness of human beings in different parts of the world. It's rated between 0 and 0.5, and essentially we're trying to understand and diagnose the areas where we need to be focusing energy to have the biggest impact on wellness. Unfortunately, the line at the bottom is Sub-Saharan Africa, and we're still the lowest on the registry for human development. What is obvious is that the line is slanting and going to the right, and what is obvious, and all the smart people that crunch numbers and give us these great insights, all agree that the human condition is improving. The question I ask is it improving at the correct rate? There's a gentleman called Moore, and he defined a law called Moore's Law. Moore's Law essentially is about understanding the development and the growth in technology capability over time. And he essentially said the capacity of a microchip will double and double and double and double again ad infinitum every single year since the first microchip was invented. That's the reason why we've got smaller cell phones. That's the reason we've been able to put subdermal chips under our skin and be able to get information. So Moore's Law says that technology will do that. And by and large it has. The question I ask, because Moore's got a law, Facebook has also got a law, it's governed by Zuckerberg's law, which says you will consume more information next year, or double the information next year as you consume this year, and double the information the following year as you consume the year before. So I decided that Moore's got a law, Mark's got a law, I need to create a conundrum. So I created Kalenga's conundrum, right? Which says, if technology is doubling and doubling and getting better and better, how is it that the human condition is only increasing incrementally and not exponentially? And that gap creates an opportunity for us to think about leadership and how we show up in a better way. If we can send people to the moon but we can't feed people on Earth, we're doing something wrong, and we should be doing something differently. Kalenga's conundrum at its core speaks about two concepts. You need to change lives before you grow revenue, and you need to do it in that order. Mainstream economics and finance has all shifted their methodology. All the wealthy family offices across the globe are speaking about impact investments, which is all about saying, how do we change lives? How do we fundamentally move the needle for people, for the human element, before we make money? And at its core, that's going to be what leadership looks like. This machine is called a magneton trio. It was designed by a team of engineers, very intelligent guys who came together and they created the machine that was going to change the landscape around MRI machines. This machine was going to win awards. It was designed to be able to increase accuracy, and it was going to be a revenue-generating spin-off of Siemens, who invested in this particular machine. When they created this machine, they realized that there was a challenge with it. And the challenge was a very different view on how people use the machine. The chief engineer decided he wanted to go pay a visit to the first hospital that bought the machine, which happened to be a pediatric clinic. He went to the clinic and he went to sit in the reception area, and he wanted to observe how people interacted with this machine. As he sat in the reception area, he noticed a family walking towards him, a little girl in the middle flanked by her parents on either side. The little girl was visibly hysterical. He watched them walk towards the room, and he didn't say much. He just watched them go in, and he saw the operator come and receive them, and they went into the room. About half an hour later, they came back out. The little girl was still quite hysterical, and he got quite moved by this experience. And he went to the operator and he said, well, that was very strange. Why was she in hysterics? Why was she panicking the way she was panicking? And the operator said, well, she didn't like the experience. She doesn't like going into the MRI machine. Children that come here generally come in a state of hysteria. And this bothered the engineer because he thought, geez, this machine that we've spent so much money investing in, so much time and so much energy creating this thing that was going to change the industry, and the people that are meant to use it and benefit from it actually hate the experience. So he went back and he commissioned a business called IDEO, run by Dave and Tom Kelly. And this business is all about creatively solving problems. There's a book he's written called Creative Confidence. And what they did was very interesting because at its core, their book is about three elements: desirability, which is the human element, feasibility, and viability. And if you get all those three things to align just right, they say you get human-centered innovation. So they ran a process on this machine, and it's quite interesting what came out of the process. Because all they did was they painted it. They painted the machine to look like a ship, a pirate ship in particular. They painted the machine, and then they gave a narrative to the operator. They said, operator, you are now going to be someone that takes these poor children through an experience. So what's different? A girl walks in the room. The operator says to her, shh, you're going in the pirate ship. And her face lights up because she's going in a pirate ship. He says, you got to keep very still because if you move, the pirates will come and get you. And she gets excited. And he says, you got to keep very still. When you hear sounds, it's just the waves of the ocean, but we're getting closer to our destination. And so the girl goes into the machine and she lies perfectly still. Any of you know that anything about MRI machines, if someone is moving and shifting, it changes the accuracy of the readings. So you've got children lying perfectly still in this machine. So what happens? A, you solve a business problem. Your accuracy grows through the roof. B, these kids are going back to their schools and they're saying, you guys have to go into the pirate ship. So now parents, you know the pest of power is a strong thing. Parents are being forced by their kids to take their kids into this pirate ship, which is just an MRI machine. Seemingly mundane example, but focusing on solving a human problem has got fundamental impact on the business that they were running. It changed their business. We see these examples often and everywhere, and in Africa we are spoiled for choice when it comes to problems that we need to solve. Platforms like Spaza, Zipline, and even closer to home, M-Pesa, that everybody knows about. These are all solutions that chose to find a human problem, focus squarely on solving it, and to fix it. I've got a short video on a play, and let's hold thumbs that technology does not forsake me again.
It is a very difficult country in terms of topography, and many areas are hard to reach.
Traversing that terrain to get to a rural village can take hours, even though it's a very short distance.
Today, if a mother is giving birth and suffers from postpartum hemorrhaging, her life is dependent on getting a blood transfusion.
There are many different types of blood types. They have a limited shelf life. And the challenge is when you need blood, you need it immediately, but it is unpredictable which geography that will occur in. Hospitals that are in more remote areas can have a very hard time getting enough reliable supply of blood.
The time to order and get the supplies by truck is just too late.
There's no way that we can overcome the time that it takes to get anyone during the rainy season. And people would say, okay, during the rainy season, we're just not going to make it.
The best case scenario would take at least 4 hours. But with Zipline, we are looking at cutting that 4 hours to something like 15 minutes. It is a team of learners working together with Zipline to grow the project and to make it happen in Uganda.
Their ultimate vision is to put each and every one of those 11 million citizens within a 15 to 35-minute delivery of any essential medical product that they can need. And that's a revolutionary idea for any country in the world.
The life-saving medical products can overcome the lack of road infrastructure. We need to let our imagination soar.
When you have a commodity there in supply, that might be an unusual blood type or something like a rabies vaccine, and you need it immediately, the idea that we could use a drone to be able to deliver this to the country is absolutely brilliant. There's nothing else that can do that in that way.
It is like we no longer go around the hills, but we fly over the hills.
We put together a team in places like Boeing, SpaceX, Google, Lockheed Martin, and it's an honor for Zipline to partner with them a little one day.
We place a hub next to an existing medical warehouse, and it instantly enables that warehouse to make hundreds of deliveries per day to any location within range.
The doctor sends us their order by text, by phone call, whatever's convenient.
Somebody identifies the need and then prepares the package, puts it on the drone.
Then we take that vehicle and we put it through pre-flight tests. It's launched, it flies automatically out to the clinic.
The path is being calculated, it's in the computer.
And then they'll receive a text message saying, say it was 2 minutes away, please walk outside.
It drops the packet, and then it goes and collects it.
It turns around, it flies home, and then we get ready for the next delivery. Our service not only makes it possible, but also affordable for countries to deliver reliable access to essential medicines for all of their citizens.
What we're looking forward to see here is saving lives.
This isn't a small step forward. This is a transformational change to how we provide medical care to people across the world.
So that's a great example of technology meeting a human need. And it doesn't need to be this complex. If you dissect the technology they're using basic SMS, they're using some geo-targeting or geospatial information. The drone, the hardware is probably the most exciting thing, but at its core they're not reinventing the wheel. And often the challenge when we think about leading in a technological environment, we think about the new shiny thing. And that often is not the case. Coming back to the research that was launched by PwC, an interesting stat was 54% of CEOs, CIOs that were interviewed were still spending about 80% of their time digitizing their enterprise. Digitizing enterprise could mean we're going from paper to PDFs, it could mean any number of things, but it's a basic entry point into technology. What is interesting is that the same group of CEOs, 74% of them were spending their time investigating artificial intelligence. And I kind of looked at it and I thought, well, you kind of have to walk before you crawl, or do you have to crawl before you walk? You crawl before you walk and you walk before you run. And the problem with technology is we get so swept up about this wonderful stuff that we can do, but we forget to take the basic steps to create and to realize value. If we take those steps, it's quite possible that technology can reframe the reality of the people we're trying to target. And in reframing reality, I'm talking about taking a fundamentally different approach to the people that you're looking to serve. There's a book written about the development of humanity over time called Sapiens. And it speaks about the reason why primates and hominids went on to survive to become where we are now. And in this book, there's some interesting observations. But if you think about the genesis, essentially two men sitting or two primates or two hominids sitting in a vast plain of land, and they start playing with rocks, and they throw rocks at each other. And as one misses the rock, it drops and it hits another rock, and it strikes the rock. And through that process, they see that a spark comes from striking the rock. And they see that the interaction between one rock and the other leads to a spark. They then pick up a piece of straw, a piece of wood, and they start rubbing that together. And through the same investigative reaction, they start to see that something is happening. Smoke then develops. At the center of it, they realize that this smoke could become a fire. The fire can allow them to see in the night, and that's fundamentally preserving themselves from being eaten by wild animals. It's a human response to a potential scenario that could lead to death. The fire can also cook food, which allows them to take raw stuff and turn it into a preserved form. Through this process, iterating on the fact that they've got problems to solve, you can understand how that becomes a piece of technology in their hands. The extreme view is also true. We have now got these mobile devices in our hands that allow us to geotag, where our favorite eating spots in Braamfontein, and at a drop of a pin, get someone to pick us up and take us there, or get someone to drop off that food. At the center of it, it is a problem that we've identified, and on either side, it's technology that allows us to solve the problem. So focusing on meaningful solutions will allow us to be able to unlock that value. A lot of businesses try and understand where to start and how to approach this. And it's quite simple. There's 4 steps that most of what they call unicorn businesses apply. The first is that each and every industry and each and every environment has got what we call a dominant system. A dominant system is a great thing because it reduces risk and people understand what they're investing in. McDonald's is a dominant system as an example. In those dominant systems, there are great opportunities to start finding alternatives to do the same thing. And in finding those alternatives, you have to wrap the alternative in a skill or a set of skills to be able to realize the value. And in so doing, you actually start to shift culture. There was an interview I listened to, and it was a radio interview, and it was a discussion between lots of people that were in the entertainment industry, and particularly restaurant owners, and the impact of Uber and urbanization. And the one thing that was very interesting to note is that they realized that after years and years and years of making decisions around location that depended on how much parking was available, in the modern context, that was a non-factor, because 80% of their patrons were getting dropped off in Ubers. Now, did Uber set out to disrupt the parking industry? Probably not. But as a result of identifying an alternative system and creating value around it, they're able to do so quite easily. And this construct is a very simple but important one for leaders, not only as young people, but leaders that are in systems and industries that have stayed and that have been able to survive the test of time, but at a precipice between succeeding in the future and dying forever. Ultimately, we all have the goal and objective to win. We have the goal and objective to make bottom line impact. But I put it to you that we should actually have a second objective. And changing in lives should be that objective and should be the spirit of everything that gets done. And in changing lives, you need to be clear about the context in which you operate in. And there are 5 fundamental shifts that have happened into the context we are now. And those contexts have given birth to a new style of leadership, which is leading at the speed of light. The first shift is quite simple. We've gone from desktop to mobile. Now, in our context as an emerging market, specifically in Africa, we leapfrogged the desktop, as they call it. What does that mean? It means that the majority of the internet-connected users never actually connected on a desktop. They went straight to a mobile device. And this fundamentally means we have to change the way we interact with them. Mobile and smartphone users are going to continue to grow. There will be a moment in time, and they estimate it's about 18 to 24 months, where feature phones get surpassed by mobile devices that are smarter. And when that happens, you're putting a microcomputer in someone's hand that's got the power to change their lives. We know that people use the mobile phone as an extension of their lives. We call it the remote control of your life. 2.5 hours, they say, you spend with this thing in your hand. It's actually quite an interesting observation. I've started to do this social experiment, and I encourage you to do the same. Next time you're in a small or confined space, like an elevator with someone, try and look them in the eye and see what their first reaction is. What's their first reaction? They'll pick up their phone and they'll try and avoid you. Right? Because these things have started to become a key part of our lives. They've started to connect to us in such a way that we have to understand how to work with them to be able to solve problems for the communities and the people we serve. The second shift is from big screens to small screens. Seems mundane and simple, but at its core, if you're in an online environment and previously you had real estate that looked like that to work with, the reality is now you have real estate that looks like that to work with. And what that means is that you have to be fundamentally clear about what you're going to be serving to people as important information for them to consume. Without the luxury of being able to say all things, you have to say it in a tweet. Without the luxury of infrastructure and real estate to do everything, you have to become very clear and very precise about how you speak, target, and land messaging and products. Interesting research that's conducted by a business called SalesBrain in the US speaks about the relationship between mobile devices and consumers, or new consumers. And 2 interesting findings. The first is that most people have got a higher level of trust in a mobile device than they have in a television screen because of the proximity to the face. So the closer the mobile device is to your face, the more trust you have in it. I'm pretty sure some of you late at night have seen your partner or someone that's close to you looking down at their phone and smiling for unknown reason, but they're smiling at this thing because there's a relationship and a rapport you've now developed with this device. The second thing is there's a level of trust that people place in a mobile device that surpasses any other medium. And that's not going to change either in the short term. So with these 2 primary big communication hurdles that have been surpassed by this mobile device, how are we capitalizing on that to change people's lives? The third shift is from single device to multi-device, which I've spoken about already. But essentially, if you look at South Africans, 83% of them are multi-device users. And multi-device meaning at least more than 1. Some people have got 3, some people have got 4. The reality of where we're seeing our world going is that people are going to seamlessly interact between devices. They're going to seamlessly move from mobile to desktop to tablet, and back again. And if you're communicating to them and if you're trying to land messaging with them, it's important that you keep that square in the notion of your strategy. There's also been a big shift from what we call search to discovery. There's a tendency to lump digital marketing all together, but there's a core difference between search and discovery. Search, Google says, please find me a university in the Braamfontein area, and you press enter and it serves back to you the results. Discovery, you're not really sure what you're going to get. So Facebook is a discovery platform. If I asked any of you to take out your phone right now, turn on or snap your Facebook app, and tell me what you're going to see as the first 5 posts on your timeline, you probably can't tell me that. But there's a realization and there's a trust that you have that whatever you're going to see is going to be important to you. And why is it important for discovery? Well, there's a simple relationship right now that's happening between content and attention that is difficult to ignore. The content that's being produced every single day is going to grow and grow and grow and tend to the vertical asymptote to infinity. But our attention as human beings is actually going to plateau. So if you're going to be trying to target people in a world where the information that they're going to have is going to always be more than the attention that they have, you have to get better at giving the information that is correct and that applies to them in the correct context. This gap is not going to get smaller, it's going to get aggressively bigger. The fifth shift is from text to visual. Now, if you go from the days of the typewriter to the mobile device, there's a lot that's changed. But even with the phone itself, if you look at how the screen size and how the orientation of the screen has changed, we've gone from an environment where we had smaller screens with a lot of text to where we're going to bigger screens with lots of imagery. The next revolution as far as communication is concerned is video, and a lot of platforms like Facebook and like Google and YouTube are already onto this. Everybody else is still catching up. But much the same as if I was to ask any of you about 10 years ago to look under your chairs, get a ticket to Paris, go there and tell me about your experience, you'd have probably sent me a text SMS 10 years ago. Repeat the same exercise just 5 years later, you're likely to have sent me an image of some sort. Repeat the exercise today, you're likely to send me a video. If you repeat that same exercise in 3 or 4 years' time, you're likely to send me something that is more immersive, 3D augmented reality, because that's the journey which consumers are going on. And leading in those contexts means that you have to show up in the context that's going to drive behavior that is beneficial to your cause or to your strategy. The next thing that we need to be considering is that in a virtuous circle, we need to understand that the attention of the people that we're trying to serve has now moved down to milliseconds. The television ad, the first television ad, was 30 minutes long, and it was quite a boring thing. They took a radio script and they sat someone down in front of it, in front of a radio script, and they took cue cards and they recorded him saying exactly what he would say on the radio script, and that took 30 minutes. We then got down to 30-second TV commercials. That was great, 30 minutes to 30 seconds. And now Facebook fundamentally is measuring their video ads based on 3 seconds, right? They're considering 3 seconds as the period of time that you have got to land an important message and to make someone want to take action. 3 seconds. It's called the 3-second audition. If you think about how quickly your thumb goes through your timeline, it can make sense. It takes the human brain a millisecond to register an image, and it takes it more time to register stuff that is related to text. But that's the speed at which you're operating. And the big question is, how do we show up? How do we lead at the speed of light? And what does leadership at the speed of light look like? Because most of you sitting in this room are going to have to identify it, nurture it, and grow it. A lot of young people have to fight against it to be able to stand up and be counted. But leadership at the speed of light starts with a very simple formula. The first is to keep it real, right? I've spoken about it a lot, but it's important because our change in our context is not going to be any different. Human development has to be squarely a part of what we are all collectively solving for. And if we don't keep that real, we are not building sustainable business in the long run. The numbers are frightening. 880 million people still struck by poverty. 755 million people with chronic hunger. 780 million illiterate adults. And 37 million still affected by HIV and AIDS. So if we don't keep it real and focus on what's important, even though we continue to build money, we're going to end up in a very short road to nowhere. The second is we need to pursue leadership with zero fear. A big part of being able to step over the line and be able to do what is important for young people is to pursue it with no fear. We have a culture, unfortunately, in Africa of apologizing and seeking affirmation before we do things. And all of us here are either responsible of panel beating that into our young people or of being custodians of that very mentality. There are people that build businesses and they ask for no excuses and they ask for no permission. There's a gentleman called Adam D'Angelo, and he's the chief engineer for a business called Cora. He was the chief engineer for Facebook when it first started. Quora is a business that's sitting on about a $2.6 billion valuation, and nobody knows what it does. He built it because he says, I need to solve a problem that we don't know we have yet. And he's 27 years old. He didn't ask for anybody's approval. He didn't ask for anybody's permission. He just did what he thought was right. So we've got a collective responsibility to make sure that young people are leading with no fear. And it's uncomfortable for us observing. And I say us, I'm still young. It's uncomfortable for us observing, but we have to encourage and we have to nurture it. The first principle of leading at the speed of light is this concept of dynamism. Vigorous activity and progress. Now, young people are good at the first one, vigorous activity, right? We're all good at looking busy. But the link between that and progress is important. Because although you can be vigorously active, you can be achieving absolutely nothing. And you need to be clear about identifying leaders who display those capabilities of being vigorously active and having measurable progress. If you look at someone like Mark Zuckerberg, who speaks about this concept of moving fast and breaking things, and says if you're not moving fast, then you're actually not doing anything that's worth doing. The Facebook app itself, when I worked for Facebook, used to update itself 7 times a day, our internal app. 7 times. Now, you ask yourself, what on earth could they be doing 7 times a day? But that's the speed at which the internal business was churning out solutions and changing the app. To a person like me, I couldn't see the difference. But for the business, it was a core part of how they operated. When the decision was made for the business to move away from desktop to mobile, it was a decision that was made overnight. The second thing that happened is that Mark took his, what he calls his M team, his direct reports, and he restructured his organization to be mobile focused and mobile driven. He made this decision at a time where everyone was still asking how we were going to monetize on desktop. 7 years later, 90% of our revenues are coming from mobile. He's also very clear that we should not mistake motion for progress. You could be in a rocking chair going back and forth and not moving anywhere. And I think this is the trap for young people and leadership in our context today, is that we get caught in cyclical conversations, we get caught in debates and discussions, and we're on this rocking chair that's going back and forward, but we're actually making zero progress. The second principle around leadership at the speed of light is resilience. And this notion that you can take the ability to recover from difficulty and toughness over and over again. Now, if you look at someone like Michael Jordan, who squarely blames his success or attributes his success to the fact that he's failed so many times, we need to start understanding how to orientate our younger leaders around this notion of failure. Culturally, it's not a great thing to fail. It's not accepted as a good thing. It's not a naughty badge. It's nothing to be proud of. And that's probably the starting point of why people are so put off by trying new things. Young people are starting to get a little bit over that, and they're trying to step out and do things and try and lead in a way that they might end up failing, but we need to create environments that are conducive to them understanding that it is okay to fail. In fact, failing is more a sign of progress than rocking back and forth and not achieving anything. The last principle when you're leading at the speed of light is this notion of high performance, and it's the relationship between goals and superior results. You see, you can have a team that's achieving goals and they can be just achieving mundane results. And it happens a lot of the time. Government institutions are a classic case in point. People are ticking the boxes, but are they achieving superior results? Absolutely not. We need to stand up examples of people that are changing the narrative around, number one, creating teams that are amazing, but number two, completely changing the narrative. SpaceX recently launched a rocket that went to the moon, came back, and they sent it back again. It's the first time it's been done in the history of aviation. Now, you're not able to reuse a rocket. That the most expensive part is called the booster, and they were able to reuse the booster for the first time 3 weeks ago. And they said it wasn't able to be done. It only happened because of 2 things. 1, clear leadership. 2, the ability to put together a team that believed that it was possible to achieve exactly what it said it was going to achieve. So Elon Musk is someone that I think is a great example of high-performance leadership that leads to results. That's not just linked to progress. If we're able to harness all these key principles, I think it's an important thing that we'll be able to encourage and create more sustainable environments for young leaders and for the transformation that's needed. And I think fundamentally we are going to change the world, but it's important that all of us here take responsibility in making sure that that change starts right here in Africa. Thank you.